Do you always find that your models die a little bit too fast in your game of 40k? This video is for you then, because this is all about targeting the right units at the right time to ensure that you win that game. Hello and welcome to Tactical Rock 40k. My name's Toby Bennett, one of the top Dark Angels players in the world, and today we are going to be talking about why it matters with target prioritization. This is one of the key fundamentals for Warhammer 40,000, and putting that Dark Angel spin on it will help make sure that your Lion goes from killing one unit and then dying to surviving for the entire game. You'll always find that if you're able to get the right unit in the right place at the right time, usually that game is going to go a lot better for you. But it's difficult to make sure that you're leading up to this in the most efficient way possible. So we're going to break that down in this video to an early game, mid game, and late game. We'll make sure that you understand all of the key tricks that you can do and exactly what role a unit should play to ensure that it is going after the right target and also winning you the game, because those are two completely different things. It's important to be able to differentiate between winning the game and targeting the right units. How on earth do I make sure that I am targeting the right units? In the early game, you are looking to try and set up where you're going to be. Now, it's really critical that your Deathwing Knights and your Lion are getting into positions where they're able to push forward and punish your opponent as much as possible with a big hammer charge. That's what we're going to get to in the mid game and late game. But setting that up so they're going into the right unit is so important, because otherwise, if a Deathwing Knight ends up charging an 80-point chaff unit, that's going to end pretty badly for you, because then suddenly the meaningful guns for your opponent are behind and ready to ruin you. So, in that early game, make sure that you are getting rid of the units that your Deathwing Knights don't want to charge, which is the chaff, your jump pack intercessors, your striking scorpions, rangers, all those kinds of units. Make sure that they are dealt with units like scouts, vanguard vets if you're playing Wrath of the Rock, all of those kinds of more tradable units that we have in Dark Angels. We might have a few less than most other armies, but if we use them efficiently by going after the correct kind of target, and I promise you, a Rogaldorn is not the correct kind of target, then you will get more out of that unit, because it's able to actually get those kills or just hold up an opponent long enough to ensure that your Deathwing Knights can get in the right place. Now, the other part of the early game is making sure that you are hunting down and killing some of the key units that can destroy Deathwing Knights. Now, what I like to do is I always try and target at least one that I can deal with at range with things like Land Speed of Vengeances, so that when my Deathwing Knights do decide to go in, the clapback is not as hard as they could do. A really good example of this is the Land Speed of Vengeance into, say, Howling Banshees and Jane Czar. If you're able to get a bead on them early, all the better. That will massively benefit your mid to late game. So looking at where you can get your fast shooting units into a position where they can punish maybe the odd sloppy deployment, or just keep your opponent back so that they don't get as many activations into your Deathwing Knights. Those are those critical key early game target priorities that you can do. Now, in the mid-game, that's when you want to be killing stuff. That's when the Lion and the Deathwing Knights absolutely clap into your opponent. That's the hammer blow of the Dark Angels army. And to be perfectly honest, probably the reason that you enjoy playing Dark Angels. Because let's be fair, we all like absolutely clattering people in the face with a Mace of Absolution. So make sure that you are killing units in those key areas of the board, though, like objective markers, and also in key staging points for your opponent. If you interrupt their flow with your mid-game killing and your hammer blow, then you are in a far better spot later in the game to keep pushing on and end it right there and then, because I think that's the really key detail. Just segueing rather onto the late game really quickly, that is where you just keep up the pressure. You want to make sure that you're not taking your foot off your opponent's throat. You want to give them no recourse and not let them get a foothold back into the game. That involves slingshotting forward. We're going to go through all the key details on how you're going to do that and how you're going to keep up that pressure and make sure that your opponent can't recover from that hammer blow. The best way to win a game is to break your opponent's back in a single turn. Now, if you're able to do this, you are almost certainly going to win, and this video is going to teach you how to do that. So, when we say in the early game we need to make sure that we're targeting Deathwing Night Killers. What does that actually mean? Now, obviously, we've got Azrael here looking like an absolute Chad because he ensures that our Deathwing Knights can be a little bit safer when they are AOCing because they've got a little bit more durability because of the strats that you can have access to. So make sure that you're bringing Azrael at all times just so that you are supporting those Deathwing Knights as efficiently as possible. But here's what to look out for. Now, I've broken it down into 4 key categories. You could put 3 and 4 together because, in all honesty, they do tend to feel the same, but there's a little bit of a difference when you actually do experience those. So we're gonna do them slightly differently. But then we're gonna break down how you deal with different units carrying those weapons. So let's start with what to be careful of. High AP, mass 1 damage. Now, obviously, one of the massive strengths of Deathwing Knights is that they are -1 damage. But if your opponent's able to put a volume of high AP shots at 1 damage into your Deathwing Knight unit, they're pushing you onto your invulnerable save, so you're failing 50% of those, and then they're not getting any damage reduction, but they're probably still benefiting from the fact that they have a magnitude of 1 damage shots. That tends to be where the units that are successful that have 1 damage, it's because they spit out a lot of shots. I definitely didn't say the other word there. They spit out a lot of shots, which can really punish Deathwing Knights. Now, obviously, it will take a long time to chew through those Deathwing Knights, but that chip damage can be really fundamental in just ruining your efficiency when you do break into their line. And to be perfectly honest, that's what they're going to be trying to do. When I say that we're using our chaff units to delay and misposition our opponent, this would be a perfect way that your opponent can do it back to you. So be aware of that and be ready to counter that play with your own expendable units that can handle that kind of light infantry body for the most of the time. We are seeing a little bit of that high AP mass 1 damage coming out of Ultramarines in the form of the Repex with Storm of Fire, or whatever the Blades of Ultramar version is called. That is one to be aware of and is a really pain in the backside little strat because it messes around with the numbers and everything like that. But for the most part, you're more likely to see this kind of move out of light infantry with skirmish combat. Now, next, we're looking at that medium volume damage 3. This is a bit of a nightmare for Deathwing Knights because obviously 3 going down to 2, obviously it's a 33% damage reduction, which is not bad, but you only need 2 of them to go through to kill a Deathwing Knight. It's why oftentimes Land Speed of Vengeances are so efficient into Deathwing Knights back, because they put them on their invulnerable save, and then it's a volume of damage 3. Now, this tends to come out of elite units. I've put the example of like Speedy Plasma with the LSV as a Dark Angels coded version of that. But in all honesty, that can be a multitude of heavy infantry or characters with that infantry that can really bring that pain down on you. Even something like the Deceiver with his Cosmic Fists can provide that medium volume of damage 3 attacks. So it's just something to keep in mind of how you're going to be able to deal with that. And when you're looking at elite infantry and how you're going to fight back against it, to be perfectly honest, the right response tends to be what we would reach for when we're trying to kill DWKs ourselves. And that is something like the Land Speed of Vengeance, like Vindicators, possibly even Azrael with his friends. If you're running him with ICCs, even more so. If you're running him with Assault Intercessors, maybe a little bit less, but he's still very efficient in that role, especially if they're on an objective. Just make sure that you're looking for where you can pack as much 3 damage as possible, especially with a turn of speed. That 14 inches for the Land Speed of Vengeance is the really critical part to then be able to out-skirmish your opponent's elite infantry when they do pop out and counter them so that they can't get that volume of damage 3 into your Deathwing Knights. And it's also pretty critical because it tends to be that those are 3 wound models, which is where that kind of Land Speed of Vengeance profile really flourishes, because damage 3 in Dark Angels is a little bit harder to come by than I would like. The Land Speeder is probably the most efficient. The rest of it tends to be D6 out of Codex Space Marines, so a little bit different. But equally, that's probably the best way that you can get those one-shots into elite infantry. Now, the next is likely to be carried by elite infantry as well, and that is melters. You will see that on light infantry as well, with Kassakin out of guard as an example, or you might see it even on tanks like the Black Templars Repulsor Executioner, or the Black Templars Impulsor, or the Black Templars anything, because that can be a massive pain in the bum when they just bring a random multi-melter. Now, the reason that is particularly efficient in 2 Deathwing Knights is because if they are within melter range, that modifier ignores the fact that we have -1 damage. So you are always taking a minimum of 3 damage regardless of what they roll. So they only need to roll under average to be able to kill you. And that hurts quite a lot. So just be aware of where melters can be. They do tend to have to get nice and close to you. 9 inches is usually where they are. And if they're 9 inches away from you, that's where you can usually crack back pretty hard. But just be aware so that when your Deathwing Knights are traveling up the board and getting to those key staging positions, there's not those little gaps that your opponent can sneak some melters in and cause havoc, because that can be really problematic, that every save you fail, you are losing a Deathwing Knight. So again, the best way to handle them, it's partly playing the angles and playing the range game, but equally you've got fast units, you've got things like JPIs, you've got scouts, they can go in and deal with those melter carrying annoyances. But also bear in mind that you can just look to move block these units. I'm struggling to think of many units that have a volume of melter fire and fly outside of Drakari. And to be honest, I don't think they want to start flinging scourges with heat lances at you on turn 1 or 2. But there's certainly ways that you can make sure that your opponent isn't able to get those melters towards those Deathwing Knights, and that they're going after kind of irrelevant targets. Early skirmish targets, especially if they've got an invulnerable save, like the Vanguard Veterans, is a really great example of how you can deal with those kinds of units. Vanguard Veterans absolutely tear Kassakin to pieces, so that can be a particularly useful one. Lascannons and lascannon-like weapons, so the D6 plus X, they're a pain in the bum because a lot of the time they will just flat kill Deathwing Knights. Your opponent only needs to roll a 4+ if they're doing it with a lascannon. Obviously that goes down if it's something like a Dark Lance or a Bright Lance. And it's important that you're able to look for where those longer range sight lines are, because that will be where Dark Angels really do struggle, because we've got to get into those units. So if they're able to start shooting us from across the battlefield, like on a GW deployment, that's where your problems can begin. So look for those units that have that range and look to punish them. Bring some units at yourself that can punish at that range too. I think the best example on, again, Games Workshop terrain would be the Centurion Devastators, because if your opponent pops out with that Oath redundancy as well, you're able to really punish your opponent with those las cannons and the missile launchers that they bring. Finally, how to deal with tanks that are packing las cannons, auto cannons, battle cannons, all that kind of stuff. Basically, any kind of cannon. That's the Lion's job. That's Dad's job, to come in and ruin those problems, because, and say it with me people, he is a DILF. And that DILF goes in and ruins any tank without an invulnerable save. If you want to go and see more ways to use the Lion more efficiently, then click the link in below so that you can go through to my video on the Lion and check out how you can get the most out of him. Now, in the meta that we are currently facing, where there's a lot more Catan floating around as well, I'm keen to play Vindicators, which gives us another anti-tank piece, really critically, that can push up and cause trouble to your opponent, giving that stat check and causing issues for them. If you are facing a tank spam, make sure that you've got the Lion and some Vindicators handy so that you can push up and punish them for poking out. That can oftentimes be where Deathwing Knights actually become a little bit more bait in bringing those tanks out into the open and allowing you to punish them. The Lion is phenomenal at doing that, particularly if you've gone first and can up him and then just rapid ingress him right near that tank and deal with it. That has been one of the key ways that I've been dealing with Guard with Rogal Dawns recently. Definitely one to bear in mind. Now, the counterpunch. This is a really important one, because all the time during Dark Angels, we are setting up and building board position with our early skirmish units, our scouts, our combi lieutenants, our Catan captains. All of those units are building that board presence and building that early score so that our opponent falls behind. And that is when they're going to panic. And when they panic, they will push forward into you hard. And once they push forward into you, you get to go for the Rocky Balboa style counterpunch to the bonds, which is always quite an enjoyable move to pull. So make sure that you're threatening that board state. If you're in positions to score, your opponent has to do something about it, because otherwise you're just going to win the game without having to roll any dice. You can just simply win win in the movement phase, which makes life a lot easier because you take the variance out of it. But make sure that you're eliminating their skirmish pieces that can go and either deny your primary or sneak around and score secondaries for them. Make sure that they are a priority in the early game with your skirmish pieces so that they don't have that later game flexibility to go in and score. I think the best example of that is out of the scintillating legion lists, where if you can hunt down and kill those screamers, your stocks go extremely high, extremely quick, because suddenly there's no one that they can puppeteer through, and they're a heck of a lot slower. At that point, your opponent's going to be forced to put meaningful units out to contest those objectives. And as soon as they start pushing, they're throwing, say, I had an example where someone had to throw 10 possessed into a unit of scouts, and at that point, I was able to hammer blow them with 2 repulsor executioners. So forcing those meaningful units out, suddenly you can then get that hit, make sure that you are punching through your opponent and that they don't get to alpha strike you. And that is the simplest and easiest way to get a win, because that is how you break your opponent's back. But once you have broken their back, there is another key step where you need to keep pushing. Now, when you keep pushing, you are going to face lots of different threats that come in. But more importantly, you need to use that slingshotting ability that your Deathwing Knights keep charging, getting their extra movement. If you can keep up with the advance and charge, even better. But the Lion, I think, is probably the best example, because your opponent will need to overcommit into him. And if you can force your opponent to overcommit into him, you're going to be in an excellent spot. Now, let's break it down quickly into what this example list provides and what each unit is doing to ensure that you're able to punish them and break their back with that target priority. Now, the Lion, he is going to pressure your opponent. He's looking for those big, thick units that your opponent tends to have sunk a lot of points into and punishing them simply for existing. He's really quite good at that, but because he's also got that 3-up invulnerable save, he is able to drag your opponent out, force them to overcommit resources into him, and oftentimes, because you are lone-upping him with that 3-inch of Dark Angel's infantry, you are forcing them really nice and close. So think about using that to then produce that hammer blow, because if he's sitting in a position where he can comfortably go and charge the next turn, or if he's just scoring you points, suddenly your opponent is stuck between a rock and a hard place of pushing to try and shoot him or try and charge him and getting either fights firsted or potentially scammed on a 3-up invulnerable save. And at that point, even if you lose the line, your opponent's army is probably just in front of you, and a nice charge from the Deathwing Knights will just break their back. So Lion is very good at applying that pressure, but he's also extremely good at dragging your opponent into the open. Now, Azrael with some assault intercessors, to be honest, they're just securing board presence. It's really important that they find the correct spot, which is your expansion objective, and sit there scoring you those points. If you're able to have that kind of key base of OC, at that point, you can quite comfortably start pushing up and dealing with your opponent, because it's unlikely that they're able to chuck 11 OC efficiently at that kind of unit to be able to deny you your expansion. And if you are consistently scoring your expansion, if you're playing WTC rules, you're not going to get 20'd, which is critical if you are playing teams and you are in that blunting role. But also, you are far more likely to be able to win, because we do have the units that can go and disrupt their expansion. Next, we've got the 2 Deathwing Knights. Very simple on this one. They are there to pressure your opponent. Make sure that you are not letting up any respite once they have committed. Deathwing Knights are extremely efficient, especially when paired with the Lion, at just keeping up that pressure, soaking up fire, and consistently slingshotting themselves forward and leaving your opponent with not many good choices to make, because then suddenly they're just shooting with diminishing resources into Deathwing Knights or the Lion. And at that point, you are in a very happy spot. The Catan Captain, which is the captain in Gravis armor with the Artificer armor enhancement. Now, his job is to drag your opponent out. He will go and sit in the middle. He will slaughter through their chaff unit, because he has those strength 8 or strength 5 to AP2 damage 2 profiles. Really very useful at making sure that you get your opponent out into the open and suddenly you start punishing them, because for 90 points, he's surviving a heck of a lot. Again, they're going to have to commit something relevant to be able to deal with him, because otherwise he's going to go slap. And at that point, you're either going to get board position, or they're going to lose those key resources that were scoring them points anyway. Next, we've got intercessors. Now, they are backfield objective holders, but I like to take intercessors over something like infiltrators because intercessors sticky the objective, which allows you to leave it after you've stood on it for a turn. And in that late game, you can run them up the board. And because they've got assault, they can go a little bit faster. They can find those angles. And even though it's only bolt rifle shots, 20 bolt rifle shots can be quite relevant at taking down some of those key chaff units that might have slipped through the net, or in fact just killing something relevant if it's been put down to low wounds by a Deathwing Knight unit that then came out second best. Because having that extra resource that you can throw to keep applying that pressure can be really, very important. And to be perfectly honest, having 10 OC that you could suddenly just emergency throw towards your expansion or the middle objective can be really critical in so many missions. Scouts are that early board presence. They need to be securing you where you want to push up with your Deathwing Knights, getting that board presence and then trading their lives for, as I say, the board presence is probably the most critical thing that they're trading it for. But equally, they might do it to try and eliminate a key chaff unit or softer target that can do quite a lot of damage output. They're very good at tying units up and keeping them in the wrong place for your opponent. And at that point, that 70-point scouts is really making bang for its buck. Finally, we come to the shooting package, which is the Landspeeder Vengeances, the Vindicator, and the Stormspeeder Thunderstrike. Now, it is their job to get into those key firing lanes with the LSV covering that advance, looking to see if they can trade themselves out for one of your opponent's more expensive units. If they can't, fine. Just push with the Storm Speeders and the Vindicators right behind the LSVs so that when your opponent is forced to come out, suddenly they are facing 2 Demolisher Cannons, 2 Plasma Batteries, and potential +1 to wound into any of their tanks. And let's be perfectly honest, the amount of D6 +1 shots the Thunderstrike spits out, it's not bad either. So realistically, you are using the Landspeeder Vengeance to skirmish around. It's fast enough to get those angles that your opponent then won't be able to shoot it back. But also you are just looking for that moment where suddenly your opponent is forced to come out into you and your guns just light up and suddenly it looks like Omaha Beach on D-Day. So that's a really critical little tip in this new meta, using guns to ensure that we're actually getting that damage output that maybe Deathwing Knights are slightly missing in this particular meta. So, I hope you really enjoyed this video. I've really enjoyed making it. Make sure that you are subscribing down below. You can join the Wardens of Caliban Discord, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one. If you want to see any more content, let me know down below. I do read all the comments and everything like that, and I love taking your feedback. So thank you so much for watching, and remember, stay loyal, brothers. We'll see you in the next one.